My sweet mates thought they figured out where my money came from, and honestly, I decided to let them think they were absolutely right, because watching them spiral was about to become my favorite form of entertainment. For 3 months straight, I'd been eating nothing but ramen noodles and wearing the same pair of torn jeans practically every single day. The kind of broke college student lifestyle where you calculate whether you can afford both laundry detergent and toothpaste in the same week. Then suddenly, almost overnight, I wasn't broke anymore, and the shift was dramatic enough that even the most oblivious person would have noticed something had changed. Brianna noticed first. Of course she did. Because that girl had a radar for other people's business that was honestly more accurate than most surveillance systems. She was standing in our shared kitchen area when she watched me unpack actual groceries from actual bags. Not the sad collection of instant meals and expired crackers I'd been surviving on, but real food like chicken breasts, fresh vegetables that weren't wilted, actual bread from the bakery section, and her eyes narrowed into these suspicious little slits like I'd just walked in carrying bags of stolen money. "Since when can you afford Whole Foods?" she asked. And the way she said it wasn't curious or happy for me. It was accusatory, like I'd personally offended her by having the audacity to buy organic produce. Before I could even formulate a response, her best friend materialized from absolutely nowhere. I swear this girl had been hiding behind the refrigerator or something, appearing like some kind of gossip-seeking missile asking if I'd gotten a job somewhere. I said something deliberately vague about family help, kept my answer short and ambiguous because I knew that would drive them even crazier than a detailed explanation, and they exchanged this look, this very specific look that said they didn't believe me for a single second, and were already constructing elaborate theories in their minds. The interrogations started small at first. So subtle I almost could have missed them if I wasn't paying attention. Brianna would randomly pop into my room to chat about absolutely nothing important, but really she was scanning every surface for clues, her eyes darting around like a detective at a crime scene, taking inventory of everything I owned. Her friends started asking these weird, probing questions about my schedule, where I went during the day, why I was suddenly dressing differently and wearing clothes that didn't look like they came from the clearance rack at Target, and each question was loaded with this underlying suspicion that made my skin crawl. Then one afternoon, I caught Brianna in my room completely alone, literally going through my trash can with her hands, digging through crumpled papers and empty food containers like she was on some kind of treasure hunt. When I walked in and she jumped about 3 feet in the air, she had the nerve to say she was looking for her lost earring, claimed it must have fallen in there somehow. In my trash can. Her earring. Right. That explanation made about as much sense as saying she was searching for her car keys in my toilet. That night, I heard her on the phone with her mom through our paper-thin walls, and she wasn't even trying to keep her voice down at this point. "She's definitely doing something sketchy, Mom. No normal college kid just suddenly has money like this. It doesn't make sense. People don't just go from broke to flush overnight without something shady happening." Her friend was already drafting an email to our RA about concerns regarding my behavior and safety issues on our floor, like I was some kind of threat to the community. They wanted answers so desperately it was literally eating them alive. I could see it in how they watched me, how they whispered when I walked by, how they couldn't focus on anything else. So I decided to have some fun with the situation and give them something concrete to find, something that would confirm all their wildest suspicions. That Friday, during our usual movie night in the common room, I very strategically left my laptop open at just the right angle with a Venmo notification clearly visible on the screen, one I'd carefully crafted earlier. "Robert paid you $500. Last night was amazing," with a little heart emoji for good measure. I watched Brianna's face in the reflection of the TV screen, and it was absolutely priceless. Her mouth literally fell open like someone had just told her the world was ending, and she grabbed her phone so fast she knocked over her entire drink, sending Diet Coke splashing across the coffee table. Her friends saw the notification too, and they had this frantic, completely silent conversation with just their eyes, widening and darting back and forth like they were telepathically screaming at each other. I casually closed my laptop like nothing had happened, stretched a little, and asked innocently what movie we should watch next, while they both sat there looking like they'd just witnessed a murder. The next day, Brianna invented the most transparent reason to come into my room. Something about needing to borrow a phone charger even though I'd seen her using hers that morning. I knew exactly what would happen, so I had strategically left a men's Rolex sitting on my desk, obviously a fake one that I'd bought online for $30, but looked expensive enough to pass a casual inspection. The second she saw it, I did this panicked, dramatic grab for it, snatching it up and clutching it to my chest. "Oh God, he must have left it here," I said, letting my voice shake just a little bit. She practically sprinted out of my room, didn't even bother with the phone charger excuse anymore, just turned and fled like the building was on fire. Within hours, literally within hours, everyone on our entire floor was whispering about me. I'd hear conversations stop when I walked into rooms, feel eyes following me down hallways, and the rumor mill was working overtime. But they needed more confirmation. Apparently the Venmo and the watch weren't enough evidence for their investigation. They were building a case now, gathering facts, constructing a narrative, and watching them work together like amateur detectives was absolutely hilarious. 3 nights later, during dinner in the dining hall, my phone rang at the most perfect moment, and I answered it right there at the table where everyone could hear. Didn't even get up or move to somewhere private. "Hey, Robert," I said, making my voice all soft and gentle, the kind of tone you use with someone intimate. "No, I can't tonight. I have that economics exam tomorrow and I really need to study. Saturday works, though. Does that work for you? Your place?" I paused like I was listening to him respond, nodding along to the silence on the other end of my completely empty phone call. 43 isn't old. Stop saying that. You're barely divorced. It hasn't even been a year yet. Brianna's fork clattered onto her plate so loudly that people at other tables turned to look, and her friend was typing frantically on her phone, probably updating their group chat with this breaking news. By the time I hung up and set my phone down, they'd already spread the story to half the campus. I started getting looks from people I'd never even met before. But here's where they really showed themselves, where their true colors came out in the most spectacular way. Brianna actually reported me to the RA for safety concerns about older men in the suite and potential exploitation happening on our floor. The RA pulled me in for this mandatory wellness check, sitting me down in her office with such a concerned expression, asking if I felt pressured or unsafe in any relationships, if anyone was coercing me into anything I didn't want to do, and I had to pretend to be confused about why she was asking. Meanwhile, Brianna's boyfriend started sliding handwritten notes under my door, these pathetic little messages that said things like, "You don't have to do this for money," and "I'm here if you need someone younger," and "You deserve better than some old man." Other guys on the floor suddenly got bold, trying to corner me by the elevators and the stairwells, asking if I had other arrangements available, or if I did this kind of thing regularly. And their thinly veiled propositions made my skin crawl. Boys will be boys, apparently. Brianna and her friend staged what they called an intervention, ambushing me in the common room and sitting me down with printed articles about murdered sugar babies and sex trafficking statistics, highlighting specific passages they thought were relevant. I sat there hiding my smiles behind my hand and nodded along seriously while they talked about the dangers of transactional relationships and men who prey on vulnerable young women. They left crisis hotline numbers on my pillow like little presents, along with pamphlets about resources for students in difficult situations. Brianna started documenting everything obsessively, like when I left the building, what I was wearing, how long I was gone, creating this detailed log of my movements. I knew she had her ear pressed against our shared wall trying to hear my phone calls because I could literally see her shadow under the door sometimes. So naturally, I gave her something worth recording, something that would really fuel her investigation. I staged this loud phone argument about Robert supposedly wanting me to drop out of school and move in with him, pacing around my room and raising my voice. "I'm not some toy you can buy, Robert. I have a degree to finish. No, I don't care how nice your condo is. This isn't Pretty Woman." I made sure my voice carried through the walls clearly. I heard Brianna scrambling around in her room, probably grabbing her phone to record this evidence. For 2 entire weeks, she built this comprehensive file, screenshots of everything, recordings of my phone calls, timestamps of when I came and went, detailed notes about my behavior. She genuinely thought she was gathering evidence to save me from some terrible situation, saw herself as this heroic figure rescuing a friend. The best part, the absolute cherry on top of this whole mess, was when Brianna's boyfriend sent me a dick pic with the message, "This one's free, no old men required." I just saved it, didn't respond, just added it to my collection of evidence. Then Tuesday morning arrived, and Brianna's parents showed up unannounced. They'd driven 3 hours after Brianna called them the night before, absolutely crying and hysterical about my dangerous situation and how she was worried I'd end up dead. Her mom was visibly shaking when they walked in. Her dad was red-faced and angry, demanding Robert's full name so he could go to the police, threatening to contact the university president and the local news. Brianna stood there holding this thick folder full of whatever evidence she'd meticulously collected over the past few weeks, looking like a lawyer about to present the case of the century. I let them talk for exactly 30 seconds, let them get out all their concerns and accusations and demands, just stood there quietly while they lectured me about safety and self-respect and making better choices. Then I pulled out my phone very calmly and showed them the email from the economics department about my new research position that I'd just started 2 weeks ago, complete with the very generous stipend that explained my sudden influx of cash. Then I showed them the Amazon receipt for the $30 fake Rolex, showed them how you could still order the exact same one in multiple colors. And then, of course, I showed them the screenshot of the boyfriend's dick pic, the one he'd sent yesterday after his girlfriend told everyone I was prostituting myself. I held my phone up high so everyone in the hallway could see it clearly, turned it so her mom got a good look, then her dad, then the RA who had appeared to see what the commotion was about. "This is what your daughter's boyfriend sent me yesterday because she told everyone on this floor that I'm a prostitute," I said clearly, my voice steady and calm. Her mom started screaming at Brianna about judgment and gossip and spreading vicious rumors, her voice getting higher and shriller with each word. Her father looked like he wanted to punch someone, his face turning an even deeper shade of red as he turned to confront the boyfriend who had slunk into the hallway. Brianna was crying, actual tears streaming down her face, saying that I tricked them all, that this was entrapment or something, that I'd manipulated the situation and made her look bad on purpose. The only calm person in this entire chaotic scene, honestly, was the boyfriend who was looking pretty smug about his picture being displayed for everyone to see, like having his dick shown to his girlfriend's parents was somehow a point of pride. Update. Brianna's mom was still yelling at her when Reed finally approached me and gently touched my elbow, guiding me away from the crowd that had gathered in the hallway to watch this complete disaster unfold. He looked absolutely wiped out, like someone who'd just finished running a marathon they didn't sign up for, and his usual cheerful RA demeanor had been replaced with this tired, serious expression that told me this situation had officially become his problem to deal with. We walked down the hall past several residents who were still standing in their doorways watching the drama, and Reed kept his hand on my elbow like he was worried I might bolt or something, steering me toward the stairwell at the end of the corridor. Once we got inside the stairwell where it was quieter and more private, he turned to face me and ran his hand through his hair in this stressed gesture I'd seen him do during finals week. He explained that he needed to file an incident report about everything that just happened, his voice low. An official sounding, and he specifically mentioned the dick pic and all the harassment allegations because apparently this whole mess had crossed way beyond normal roommate drama territory into something the university had to take seriously. I nodded along while he talked, still riding the adrenaline high from exposing Brianna in front of everyone. And honestly, part of me felt bad for Reed because he was just trying to be a decent RA, and now he was stuck dealing with fake sugar babies and unsolicited dick pics. He asked if I could come to his office right now to give an official statement while everything was fresh in my mind, and I agreed immediately because I wanted to get this documented before anyone tried to twist the story around. Reed's office was this tiny converted storage room on the first floor that barely fit a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet, and the walls were covered with campus resource posters and a whiteboard with RA duty schedules written in different colored markers. He pulled out some official-looking forms and a laptop, settled into his desk chair, and gestured for me to sit in the uncomfortable plastic chair across from him. For the next hour, I walked him through everything, starting with how I'd gotten the research position in the economics department and decided to let Brianna think I was a sugar baby instead of just telling her the truth. Reed kept shaking his head while I explained the fake Venmo notification I'd created, how I'd left it open on my laptop during movie night specifically so she would see it, and his expression shifted between disbelief and reluctant amusement. When I got to the part about the $30 Amazon Rolex I'd strategically left on my desk, he actually laughed out loud and had to apologize, saying this was hands down the weirdest situation he'd dealt with all year, and he'd once had to mediate a dispute about someone stealing Tupperware. I showed him screenshots of the fake Venmo on my phone, pulled up the Amazon order confirmation for the watch, and walked him through each deliberate breadcrumb I'd left for Brianna to find. He typed everything into his laptop with this focused concentration, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and times, and I could tell he was trying to be professional, even though parts of my story were clearly entertaining him. Then his expression got darker and more serious when I mentioned the boyfriend's notes under my door and the dick pic, and he stopped typing to look at me directly. Reed explained that the boyfriend sending that picture was a serious conduct violation regardless of the context, his voice firm and official, and he said the harassment from other guys on the floor who'd propositioned me needed to be reported too, because that behavior wasn't acceptable under any circumstances. I pulled up my phone and showed him 3 other messages I'd saved from different guys on our floor, screenshots of texts asking about my rates and availability and whether I did this regularly, and watching Reed's face as he read them was almost satisfying because his jaw literally clenched with anger. He asked me to forward all the messages to his university email right there, so he'd have them documented, and I did it immediately while sitting in his cramped office. Reed explained the conduct process to me, how there would be investigations and hearings, and he assured me that this kind of sexual harassment was taken seriously by the administration, even though sometimes it didn't feel that way. I left his office feeling weird, like the adrenaline was finally wearing off, and the reality of what I'd done was starting to sink in, but also relieved that someone official knew the whole story now. The next morning, I woke up to an email from someone named Diane Benton in Residential Life, sent at 7 in the morning, which seemed way too early for administrative emails, asking me to come to her office in the main housing building as soon as possible. The email was polite but firm, and she mentioned that Reed's incident report had made it to her desk, and the administration needed to understand exactly what had happened and why, which made my stomach drop a little because this was clearly bigger than I'd anticipated. I got dressed quickly, skipped breakfast, and walked across campus to the housing administrative building, a boring brick structure that looked like every other administrative building on campus. Diane's office was on the 2nd floor, and when I knocked on her open door, she looked up from her computer and waved me in with a tired smile. Her office was professional but comfortable, with actual cushioned chairs instead of plastic ones, and her desk was covered with organized stacks of papers, and a coffee mug that said, "I survived another semester." She gestured for me to sit down and close the door, which I did. And then she folded her hands on her desk and asked me to tell her the whole story from the beginning. I spent the next 40 minutes explaining everything again, and Diane didn't interrupt once, just listened with this neutral expression while I walked through the fake Venmo, the Amazon Rolex, the staged phone calls, Brianna's investigation, and finally the big reveal yesterday. When I finished explaining how I deliberately created the sugar baby narrative specifically to expose Brianna's judgmental behavior, an invasion of my privacy, Diane sat back in her chair and rubbed her temples like she was getting a massive headache from trying to process this situation. She was quiet for a long moment, just sitting there with her eyes closed and her fingers pressed against her forehead, and I started to worry that I was in serious trouble. Finally, she opened her eyes and looked at me, and she explained that while my prank was creative, it had created a hostile living environment that the university had to address now. Her tone wasn't angry exactly, more like impressed and frustrated at the same time, and she said we needed to figure out how to resolve this situation for everyone involved, because clearly I couldn't keep living on that floor. Diane made some phone calls right there while I sat in her office, talking to someone in housing assignments about emergency room changes, and within an hour she'd arranged for me to move to a different floor in a different wing of the building. I went back to my room to pack my stuff while Brianna was conveniently absent, probably hiding in her friend's room or something, and I threw everything into boxes and suitcases as fast as I could. 2 housing maintenance guys showed up with a cart to help me move, and we transferred all my belongings to my new room on the 4th floor in under an hour. My new suite mates were 2 quiet pre-med students who were studying when I arrived, and they helped me carry boxes in and introduce themselves briefly before going back to their textbooks. The relief I felt walking into that new space was immediate and physical, like I could finally breathe properly again, and I unpacked my Whole Foods groceries into the shared fridge without anyone interrogating me about where the money came from. That afternoon, I got an email from Evelyn Ramsey in the campus conduct office, asking if I wanted to file formal complaints against the boyfriend and the other guys who'd propositioned me. Her email explained that their behavior constituted sexual harassment, regardless of whether I was actually a sex worker, and the university took this kind of conduct seriously, and had processes in place to address it. I stared at my laptop screen for a while, reading and rereading her email, thinking about those disgusting messages and the way those guys had felt entitled to proposition me just because they thought I was selling sex. I decided to file the complaints because those messages were genuinely disgusting, and they deserved real consequences for treating anyone that way. I replied to Evelyn saying I wanted to move forward with formal complaints, and she responded within an hour with a meeting time for the next day. The meeting with Evelyn was in the conduct office, another administrative building across campus, and she walked me through the entire process step by step. She explained how conduct hearings worked, assured me they were confidential, and emphasized that this mattered because I didn't want this turning into more campus gossip after everything that had already happened. I signed forms, provided statements, forwarded all the screenshots and messages, and Evelyn thanked me for coming forward because apparently these kinds of complaints helped establish patterns of behavior. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Brianna, and when I opened it, I found this long, rambling message about how she was just worried about my safety and never meant for things to get so out of hand. I read the whole thing while sitting in my new room, and I actually laughed out loud when I got to the part where she claimed that going through my trash was a reasonable concern given the circumstances. She said she hoped we could talk about everything and maybe work things out because we'd been friends before all this happened, which was honestly delusional because we'd never been friends, just people who lived near each other. I read her message twice, considered responding with something cutting, and then decided she didn't deserve any of my energy, and closed the text without replying. 3 days later, Reed caught me coming out of the stairwell and pulled me aside with this look on his face that was equal parts tired and satisfied. He told me the boyfriend's conduct hearing had happened that morning, and apparently the guy tried to claim the dick pic was just a joke between friends, which went over about as well as you'd expect with the conduct board. They weren't buying it for a second, Reed said, especially since I'd never responded to the message and we definitely weren't friends by any definition of the word. The hearing took less than an hour because the evidence was pretty clear, just my screenshot with the timestamp and the message, and the boyfriend couldn't really explain away why he thought sending that to someone he barely knew was appropriate under any circumstances. Reed looked genuinely pleased when he told me the outcome, like he'd been personally invested in seeing consequences happen, and I felt this wave of validation knowing that the system actually worked for once instead of just protecting guys who do creepy stuff. My actual job in the economics department turned out to be way more interesting than I expected. Nothing like the boring data entry I'd imagined when I first applied. Jillian had me analyzing consumer behavior patterns from this massive data set about online shopping habits, looking for trends in how people made purchasing decisions based on product presentation and pricing structures. She explained the project during my second week, spreading out charts and graphs across her desk, and pointing to specific patterns she wanted me to investigate further. I spent hours sorting through spreadsheets and running statistical analyses, and honestly, it was kind of fascinating watching patterns emerge from what looked like random numbers at first. Jillian never asked me anything about my personal life or why I needed the job or what had happened with my living situation. She just focused on the work and treated me like a competent person, capable of handling complex tasks. That refreshing lack of judgment and prying made me actually enjoy going to work, sitting in the quiet research office with my laptop and diving into data, while everyone else was at parties or dealing with roommate drama. Word about what happened with Brianna spread across campus faster than I could track, but the story got twisted into about 15 completely different versions depending on who was telling it. Some people genuinely believed I actually was a sugar baby and had just gotten caught, whispering about it in the dining hall when I walked past their tables. Others heard I'd catfished someone online and the whole thing was some kind of elaborate scam that backfired. A few people, mostly in my economics classes, seemed to think I was this evil genius who deliberately destroyed an innocent girl's reputation for fun, like I'd orchestrated the whole thing just to be cruel. I'd overhear fragments of conversations in the library or walking across campus, people saying my name and then lowering their voices when they noticed me nearby. One girl in my statistics class asked me directly if the rumors were true about the older man, and when I said there was no Robert, she looked almost disappointed, like she'd been hoping for a more dramatic story. The different versions of events floating around campus were wild, each one more exaggerated than the last, and I stopped trying to correct people because honestly, it didn't matter what they believed. 2 weeks after everything exploded, I ran into Brianna's friend at the dining hall during lunch rush. She was standing in line for the salad bar, and I walked in through the main entrance, and the second she saw me, her whole body went rigid. She literally turned around mid-reach for a plate and walked in the opposite direction, not even trying to be subtle about avoiding me, just pivoting and heading straight for the exit like I was radioactive. Part of me wanted to feel bad about how everything had played out, watching her flee like I was some kind of monster. But then I remembered finding her and Brianna going through my trash together, remembered them staging that intervention with printed articles about dead sugar babies, remembered every invasive question and judgmental look. The guilt that had started forming in my chest evaporated pretty much instantly, replaced by this cold satisfaction that they were the ones uncomfortable now. They were the ones avoiding spaces because they might run into me. I got my lunch and sat down at my usual table, and if people were staring or whispering, I didn't really care anymore, because at least they weren't going through my garbage or tracking my movements like I was under surveillance. Reed found me again about a month after the initial incident to give me an update on the boyfriend's consequences. The guy had gotten a formal conduct violation added to his permanent university record, which would show up if any future employers or graduate schools requested his disciplinary history. He also had to complete this mandatory education program about sexual harassment that met twice a week for 8 weeks, basically sitting in a classroom learning about consent and appropriate behavior like he was in middle school. Reed handed me a sealed envelope containing the required apology letter the boyfriend had written, but he made sure to tell me I wasn't obligated to read it if I didn't want to, that the letter was more about making the boyfriend reflect on his actions than about me having to accept anything. I took the envelope and shoved it in my backpack without opening it, didn't even look at it again for weeks. The best part, according to Reed, was that the boyfriend's fraternity had kicked him out when they found out what happened, apparently worried about their chapter's reputation and not wanting to be associated with a sexual harassment case. Reed said the guy had been pretty devastated about losing his fraternity membership, which felt like natural consequences to me, the kind of social penalty that happens when you do disgusting things. 3 other guys from my old floor ended up getting similar violations after my complaints worked their way through the conduct system. Evelyn contacted me to explain the outcomes, telling me that each guy had to go through the same mandatory education program and got formal violations on their records. She mentioned that my case had opened up this bigger conversation among the residential life staff about how male students treat women they perceive as sex workers. Apparently, there'd been other incidents that never got reported because victims didn't think anyone would take them seriously. Evelyn said my willingness to file formal complaints had helped establish a pattern of behavior that the university couldn't ignore anymore, that the administration was now looking at implementing better training for students about respecting all women regardless of their perceived sexual choices or work. She thanked me for coming forward, said it mattered more than I probably realized, and I felt weird about being thanked for something that had started as a petty prank but ended up exposing real problems. The fact that 3 other guys had felt entitled to proposition me, just because they thought I was selling sex, said something pretty dark about how men on campus viewed women, and apparently my situation had forced the university to actually address it. Life with my new suitemates was completely different from living with Brianna, like moving from a surveillance state to an actual normal college experience. We had movie nights where nobody interrogated anyone about their finances or job schedules or who they were seeing, just picked a film and watched it while eating popcorn and making jokes about the plot. My suitemates were both pre-med students who spent most of their time studying, and they seemed to operate on this principle of minding their own business unless someone specifically asked for help or company. Nobody went through my stuff. Nobody pressed their ear against walls trying to hear my phone calls. Nobody documented my movements or spread rumors about my life. I could leave my laptop open without worrying. Someone would screenshot my notifications, could buy nice groceries without getting interrogated about where the money came from, could just exist without constant judgment. This was honestly the most relaxed I'd felt all semester. finally understanding what college was supposed to be like when you weren't living with someone who treated your life like a criminal investigation. We'd sit in the common area doing homework together, and if someone needed to talk about their day, they would. But there was no pressure to share everything or explain yourself constantly. Through the campus gossip network, I heard that Brianna's parents had made her start seeing the campus counselor after everything came out. Apparently, her mom was absolutely furious about the invasion of privacy stuff, about Brianna going through my trash and recording my phone calls and documenting my schedule like some kind of stalker. The gossip said her mom had driven back to campus specifically to march Brianna down to the counseling center and set up weekly appointments, determined that her daughter was going to learn about boundaries and appropriate concern versus invasive judgment. Even better, I heard that Brianna's mom had made her apologize to the entire floor during a mandatory hall meeting, standing up in front of everyone and admitting what she'd done and saying sorry for spreading rumors and invading my privacy. I wasn't there for it since I'd already moved to a different floor, but Reed told me about it later and said it was pretty humiliating. Brianna crying while she read from a prepared statement her mom had probably written. Part of me wished I'd been there to see it, but mostly I was just glad to be completely removed from that situation and not having to deal with Brianna's drama anymore. Jillian called me into her office 6 weeks into the semester and offered me additional hours at the research position because I was actually good at the data analysis work. She spread out my recent reports across her desk, pointing to specific insights I'd identified in the consumer behavior patterns, telling me this was exactly the kind of analysis they needed for the larger study. The extra hours meant more money in my account, enough that I could keep buying real groceries instead of surviving on ramen, and maybe even save some for next semester or emergencies. I accepted immediately, thanked her for recognizing my work, and felt this surge of pride that someone was valuing my actual skills and competence rather than judging my life choices. After months of ramen poverty and calculating whether I could afford both soap and shampoo in the same shopping trip, having financial stability felt amazing, like I could finally breathe without constantly worrying about my bank account. The fact that this money came from legitimate work I was good at, not from some elaborate prank or fake sugar baby scheme, made it even better because I'd actually earned it through my own abilities. I got an email from the Residential Life Office asking if I'd be willing to speak at an RA training session about privacy and boundaries in residential life. First, I thought it was weird. Like, why would they want me to talk about this? When the whole situation had been so messy and dramatic. But then I read the rest of the email explaining that my case had highlighted real problems with how students treat each other in dorms. They wanted me to share my perspective on how Brianna's behavior had crossed lines, even though she thought she was helping me. How good intentions didn't excuse invasion of privacy or spreading rumors. I sat with the email for a day, thinking about whether I wanted to relive the whole situation in front of a room full of RAs. But then I realized that my ridiculous prank had accidentally exposed something important about residential life and student behavior. If talking about it could help future RAs recognize the difference between genuine concern and invasive judgment, maybe the whole mess had been worth something beyond just my personal satisfaction at exposing Brianna. The training session happened 2 weeks later in one of those standard conference rooms in the Residential Life building, the kind with rows of folding chairs and a projector screen that nobody ever uses. About 20 new RA candidates sat with notebooks open and pens ready, looking eager and slightly nervous like they were about to learn the secrets of successful dorm management. I stood at the front next to the current Residential Life coordinator, feeling weird about being asked to speak, but also kind of validated that my ridiculous situation had turned into an actual teaching moment. I walked them through specific examples of what Brianna had done, how she went through my trash claiming to look for an earring, how I could see her shadow under the door, when she pressed her ear against the wall, how she documented my movements and created this detailed log of when I left and returned. The new RAs scribbled notes frantically while I explained the difference between genuine concern and invasive judgment, how Brianna had convinced herself she was helping me when really she was just feeding her own need to know everything about my life. I told them about the intervention with printed articles about murdered sugar babies, about the crisis hotline numbers left on my pillow, about how she reported me to the RA for safety concerns, when really she just wanted validation for her suspicions. Reed sat in the back row, and when I finished talking, he gave me this big thumbs up, and several of the new RAs asked follow-up questions about recognizing boundary violations versus appropriate welfare checks. The whole presentation took about 40 minutes, and afterward the coordinator thanked me for sharing my experience, said it would definitely shape how they trained RAs going forward about respecting student privacy even when they think they're being helpful. 6 weeks after everything exploded, I was sitting in the library on the 3rd floor, the quiet study area where people actually work instead of just pretending to study while scrolling through their phones. I had my economics textbook open and my laptop out working on a paper about consumer behavior patterns when I saw Brianna walking toward my table from across the room. She had this determined look on her face, the kind of expression people get when they've rehearsed a speech in their head about 50 times and are finally ready to deliver it. I watched her approach and immediately started packing up my stuff, shoving my laptop into my backpack and closing my textbook with enough force that it made a loud thump. She opened her mouth to say something, but I was already standing up, slinging my backpack over my shoulder and grabbing my water bottle off the table. I walked straight past her without making eye contact, headed for the stairwell, and went up to the 4th floor where I found another empty table and sat up again. Whatever reconciliation speech she had prepared, whatever apology or explanation or justification she wanted to offer, I wasn't interested in hearing it because I didn't owe her forgiveness, just because she felt guilty now about how everything went down. My economics professor caught me after class 3 days later, asking me to stay behind for a minute while the other students filed out of the lecture hall. He leaned against his desk with his arms crossed and told me that Jillian had been sending him updates about my research work, said she was really impressed with my analysis skills and attention to detail. Then he asked if I'd ever considered graduate school, said students with my aptitude for data analysis and economic theory should think about continuing their education beyond undergraduate. The suggestion caught me completely off guard because I'd never really thought about grad school before, had always just assumed I'd get my bachelor's degree and then figure out some kind of job in business or finance. But having a professor tell me I was good enough for graduate programs, that someone believed in my academic abilities enough to suggest I keep going, felt really validating in a way I hadn't expected. I thanked him and said I'd think about it, and he gave me some information about different economics programs and told me to come talk to him if I wanted help with applications. The semester ended 2 weeks later after finals week, that exhausting period where everyone lives in the library and survives on coffee and stress. I packed up my stuff to go home for winter break and realized I was actually excited to come back in January, which was completely wild considering how miserable I'd been just a few months ago. My grades were solid, mostly A's with 1 B+ in statistics, and my research job with Jillian was genuinely interesting instead of just being a paycheck. My new suite mates had turned out to be great, quiet, and respectful, and totally uninterested in investigating my personal life or spreading rumors about my finances. We'd had a little holiday party before everyone left for break, just ordering pizza and watching movies without anyone interrogating anyone else about their life choices. The contrast between living with them and living with Brianna was so stark it almost felt like a different universe, one where college students could actually just coexist peacefully without turning everything into drama. I ran into Reed on campus right before winter break, both of us walking toward the parking lot with suitcases and bags full of stuff to take home. He stopped to chat and mentioned that Brianna had requested a room change for spring semester, said she was moving to a different building entirely on the other side of campus. Part of me wondered if she'd learned anything from the whole situation, if the embarrassment of having her parents show up and her boyfriend's dick pic displayed for everyone had taught her something about boundaries and judgment. But mostly I was just relieved that I wouldn't have to worry about accidentally running into her in the hallways or the dining hall anymore, wouldn't have to deal with awkward encounters or forced conversations. Reed said he thought the room change was probably good for everyone involved, that sometimes people just need a fresh start away from situations that went badly. Spring semester started in January, and I was thriving in ways I genuinely didn't expect, like something had shifted after the whole Brianna situation, and I'd found my actual place on campus. I was working more hours with Jillian on the research project, diving deeper into the consumer behavior data and identifying patterns that she said were really insightful. One afternoon in late February, she called me into her office and told me she'd submitted my research analysis to an undergraduate conference happening in April, one where students present their work to actual professionals in the field. The conference had accepted my submission, and I'd be giving a presentation about my findings, standing up in front of economists and professors, and explaining the patterns I'd identified in online shopping behavior. The news made my stomach flip with nervousness and excitement at the same time. This weird mix of terror and pride that I was going to present actual academic research to people who did this professionally. The conference happened on a Saturday in April at a hotel conference center about an hour from campus, one of those big events with multiple presentation rooms and name tags and coffee stations in the hallways. I wore actual professional clothes instead of my usual jeans and hoodie, stood in front of a room of about 30 people and presented my research findings using slides Jillian had helped me prepare. My hands shook a little at first, but once I got into explaining the data patterns, I relaxed and just focused on walking them through my analysis. Other undergraduate students were presenting similar research projects, and during the lunch break I met several of them, realized I was actually pretty good at this academic stuff, and could hold my own in conversations about methodology and statistical significance. After my presentation, a professor from another university approached me, an older woman with gray hair and kind eyes who handed me her business card and told me to apply to their graduate program. She said my analysis showed exactly the kind of critical thinking they looked for in candidates, and she'd be happy to answer questions about their economics department. I scheduled a meeting with my academic advisor the following week, sitting in her small office surrounded by filing cabinets and motivational posters about achieving your dreams. She pulled up my transcript on her computer, and we talked through different graduate school options, what programs might be good fits, what the application process looked like. She was genuinely supportive and excited, not at all dismissive like I'd worried she might be, and she helped me map out a timeline for taking the GRE and requesting recommendation letters and writing personal statements. For the first time since starting college, I had clear goals beyond just getting through the current semester, could actually see a path forward that involved doing work I was good at and enjoyed. My advisor printed out information about various programs and told me to start researching them over the summer. Said we'd meet again in the fall to finalize my application strategy. Reed graduated at the end of spring semester and threw this big goodbye party in his apartment off campus, inviting everyone from our floor plus a bunch of other people he'd met during his years as an RA. I showed up with a bottle of cheap wine and found him in the kitchen surrounded by pizza boxes and red Solo cups. We ended up talking for almost an hour about the whole Brianna situation, laughing about the fake Rolex and the Venmo notification, and how her parents had driven 3 hours to stage an intervention. He told me that dealing with my case was honestly the most educational drama he'd encountered during his entire time as an RA. Said most conflicts were just noise complaints or roommates arguing about cleaning schedules. He seemed genuinely impressed by how I'd turned everything around, going from the girl everyone thought was a sugar baby to someone presenting research at conferences and applying to graduate programs. Before I left the party, he made me promise to keep in touch and let him know where I ended up for grad school. Said he wanted to hear how everything worked out. My research work with Jillian continued through the end of the semester, and in early May, she called me into her office with this huge smile on her face. She told me that we were going to be co-authors on a paper she was submitting to an academic journal, that my analysis had been substantial enough to warrant authorship credit, rather than just acknowledgement. She explained that undergraduate co-authors were actually pretty rare, that most research assistants just did basic data entry and didn't contribute enough for authorship. Having my name on a published paper would strengthen my graduate school application significantly, she said, showing admissions committees that I could do real academic work at a professional level. I sat in her office feeling this surge of pride that was completely different from the satisfaction I'd felt exposing Brianna. This was accomplishment based on actual skills and hard work, rather than just being clever about revenge. Jillian printed out a draft of the paper with both our names at the top, and I stared at it for a long time, seeing my name in that academic format, and realizing I'd actually built something real out of the mess that had started with fake Venmo notifications and Amazon watches. The last week before summer break, I was walking through the main campus quad on my way to turn in some final paperwork at the registrar's office, when I spotted Brianna sitting at one of those outdoor tables near the fountain. She was laughing with a group of 3 girls I'd never seen before, actually laughing in this genuine way that looked completely different from the fake, cheerful mask she used to wear around our floor. Her whole body language was relaxed and open, not the tense, judgmental posture I remembered from living with her, and she was gesturing with her hands while telling some story that had her new friends smiling. I slowed down for just a second, not stopping completely, but definitely noticing how much happier she looked compared to those awful weeks when she was obsessed with investigating my life. She glanced up right then, and our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. This brief moment where we both acknowledged each other's existence without any of the drama or anger from before. She gave me this small nod, barely noticeable really, and I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be an apology or just recognition that we'd both moved on from that mess. I nodded back in the same quick way and kept walking toward the administration building without breaking my stride or looking back to see if she was still watching me. The whole ridiculous situation with the fake sugar baby prank ended up being the weirdest path to figuring out what I actually wanted to do with my life, and sometimes I still can't believe how it all worked out. That research position I got just to explain away my sudden money turned into this whole career direction I'd never considered before, analyzing data and working with Jillian on actual published academic work. I'm heading into my senior year now with solid graduate school plans, recommendation letters from professors who actually respect my work, and a transcript that shows I'm good at this economics research stuff. The people who spent weeks judging me and spreading rumors about my supposed prostitution all faced real consequences, while I ended up genuinely successful in ways I never expected. And there's something satisfying about knowing that their worst assumptions about me pushed me toward discovering my actual talents.